Inner child work isn't about going back to childhood memories. It's the part of your psyche that was formed before your frontal cortex that's alive with images, instincts, and feelings that still move you and drive you today. That's what we're going to be exploring in today's session, including a grounding practice and a new way of looking at the inner child from a Jungian perspective. Welcome to Chiron Art Therapy. I'm Maggie Colwell, an art therapist and Jungian. Here we explore archetypal images, personal symbolism in art and dreams, and what your psyche is trying to tell you. If you're ready to dive into your inner world, you're in the right place. Subscribe, and let's begin. I was just talking to my analyst about how it's very, very difficult to say anything of depth in like a short, linear way that really like what we do in analysis, because it's so individualized and because it's intuitive, it's very hard to boil down into a succinct thing that's generalizable. So I'm hoping that this will have some presence to it, even if I don't get the full depth. I was very snooty when I went to graduate school. I couldn't understand why they kept on like throwing crayons at us. I was like, nobody wants to use crayons. I'm a fine artist. But honestly, if you're trying to go something for the like sensation and the like physical feel of the materials, sometimes crayons are the right material. So it's any of those times where you're like, oh no, I'm too good for that, or oh, that's not me. I look at that and go, oh, here comes a lesson. Perfect thing for us to be starting with talking about the inner child. So oil pastels are the adult artist version of crayons. Crayons are a little bit harder and they have a little bit less pigment in them, just so they're sturdy for kids and they make less of a mess. But what I like about oil pastels is that they're very creamy, they're easier to layer with, and they have like a real nice smooth feel to them. If you put them on heavy, it can almost be like oil painting in a way. If you have a piece of paper and crayons or oil pastels or even a marker, that's great. If you don't, this is the exercise you could trace out with your finger, so you don't have to have materials. It's not going to get in the way of what we're going for here, at least to get started with. I am currently training in Zurich at the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich in psychoanalysis of working with symbolism and personal process and being able to give complexes and feelings image as a way to work with them. That was Jung's original definition of what is an archetype. So he was talking a lot about feeling toned images as we work with our own internal processes and create containers to hold our feelings, hold our aspects of our internal world. So they've in the US, art therapy is kind of like drifted a little bit, but I'm trying to bring it back to the source. So with that said, I want us to start out with a little bit of a guided visualization for you coming back to your own source. And please use that terminology the way it's going to make sense for you. But where you are right now, just be aware of where you're sitting, the line of your spine between your head, and then imagine that line going all the way down to the floor. Maybe you notice what the chair feels like holding you up, or your feet against your socks, your shoes, the floor, and just feel that connection. Notice around you what you can hear. Like I hear the air conditioning fan. And just make note of it. It's kind of in the background, holding you on the outside of your senses. And the chair is holding your body on the outside of your body. And then invite yourself inward a little bit and notice what's going on inside of you. Maybe you can feel your breath. Maybe you notice parts that are warmer or cooler, and allow that to just slow down a little bit, like the way your heartbeat slows down when you just breathe slowly. Pay attention to that. Just rise and fall of your breath and see that as an invitation for turning inward, for noticing what's going on inside of you. Can you be aware of your heartbeat in addition to your breath, a different cadence, working with your breath? And I was talking about going back to your source. Your heart has been beating since before you were born. Energy and movement, heat has been flowing within you since before you were born. And you're trying to go back to that original pattern. Like, what is your natural order? The original word for an astrological birth chart was the nativity, meaning the native place at your birth. So it's that original pattern. Take a deep breath and just breathe into that. There's nothing for us to rush through here. It's not about getting through ideas and material. It's about returning to an original space or that source. All right, so when you're ready, ask everybody to open your eyes. I'm going to turn my screen down to my page. And what we're going to do here is take a crayon, oil pastel, marker, pencil, whatever you have. I'm using oil pastels because they're smooth. If you don't have anything to draw with, the other thing you could do is you can just trace your finger. And what we're going to do very, very slowly is create a large circle. Mine's kind of an oval. It's circle-ish. The main part of what we're doing is that you're moving your hand back and forth on both sides of your body. That's a nervous system regulation technique. And breathing slowly. So you're creating this space and being slow. This is something that you could just do with your finger if you wanted to. And I want it to be painfully slow. Breathing and slow movement. If you want to make that move with what we're doing, you could breathe up as your finger goes up and then exhale all the way as your finger goes down. Another thing to do would be to switch hands. So you get that cross-body movement on both sides of your body. And see how painfully slow you can make this. You're not going anywhere. You're just making space. Your breath doesn't have a goal. It's just its normal rhythm. That's what we're trying to get back to. You don't have to go at my pace. It's about your pace. It's about finding a pace that feels easy. If you wanted to go further with this and make this into an art piece, my recommendation would be to put something in the middle. This could be a physical thing, like a candle. I have a little stone here. Like that would be good. Or even make a drawing that relates to what is center, what is source, what is that place within you that's energy that everything else arises from. A lot of art therapy is not about making art. It's about movement, color, space, and getting into relationship with your full being, whether that's your mind, your emotions, or your body. So it almost shouldn't even be called art therapy. Even Jung said that what he was doing wasn't art, even though he was an amazing painter, that he was doing some sort of experiment. It was more about making the unconscious conscious, about having a relationship to his unconscious than it was about the product. So it's about the process. We need more opportunities to slow down. So that's why I'm doing this. And I'm going to shift us now into talking about the inner child. Unless anybody has any specific questions about what we just did, I'm happy to answer it if anybody has any questions. So inner child work is kind of a buzzword right now. So I wanted to talk about it because my perception of it is not what's in alignment with the current buzz talk. So One of the things that is my perception of inner child work is that when we have automatic responses to things, when a complex is activated and we have this emotional outburst, or like when you say something and you didn't plan out what you were saying before you said it, or you had a knee-jerk reaction to something, and sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes that's not a good thing, but that automatic response, that's when a complex has arisen. And that emotional response, when it wells up within us, it's not driven by our frontal lobe or our neocortex. It's in the emotional centers, the hippocampus, the amygdala. And these are more inner parts of our brain structure that are more instinctual. So they are earlier parts of us if we're talking about the history of human evolution, but it's also a human evolution of an individual as well. And this is where it starts to get a little bit confusing for people, is that we have emotional centers and we have instinctual centers online. We have our reflexes, hunger drive. We cry when we feel scared or angry or happy. Babies become joyful, like before we have any cognitive thought process. And we have perceptions and images before we have thought, before we start to understand and learn verbal and auditory language. So we conceptualize things through emotions, instincts, and image before we conceptualize things through thoughts and linear thinking or logic. Anybody that's been around babies or little kids knows there's not necessarily a whole lot of linear thought process or logic going on. There's not linear time yet. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the inner child. It is a younger part of your brain that is activated. And this isn't about memory. This isn't about who you were when you were a kid. It is about the part of your brain that formed before your frontal cortex and came online at the beginning that is still with you. The research in stroke patients shows that these different parts of our brain can act as if they are separated and as if they are different personalities with different priorities, different values. And one of the beautiful things about art therapy is that when we do movement, when we are engaging with color, when we are engaging with symbolic image, we are starting to be able to activate more parts of our brain than normally get activated because our culture tends to only value linear thought process. It's like you're supposed to bring your thoughts with you, not your emotions, not your instincts. If you have an instinctual response, you're supposed to get it under control or take it home, which is interesting because it's just as much a part of ourselves. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing with these check-ins are sensory experiences so that you can start to come back into relationship with your body's wisdom. And that's what gives us intuitive connection with things. Internal family systems has taken some Jungian concepts and put them into a manual that they could repeat and generalize to everybody. And that's where we get a lot of our language of the inner child from. But creating a relationship with your inner child isn't about remembering who your child was and going back through those memories like in a workbook. I first remember this and then I remember that. It's about having an active relationship with the emotional part of yourself when it has those complex reactions. Is how do I soothe this? how do I validate this feeling? How do I create a soothing space for this emotional part of me that has different needs because it has primordial needs? And has anybody ever like said like, I got to stop that habit, like it's embarrassing, I got to cut it out, like I need to kill off that behavior? How well does it work when you ask a kid to like stop, no, you're bad, or you punish a kid? That's what we're doing when we have this kind of power dynamics with our young part of ourselves. It's punishment, it increases shame, and it's upsetting. It's rejecting a part of ourselves that needs us. So to be able to be with and provide acceptance and listen to those needs, that's where we get the change that a lot of people didn't get growing up, is really being with that part of ourselves, accepting it for whatever it is, not trying to discipline it or explain it away. Like my shoulders are getting tight just thinking about it. It's being aware of your body as it responds to what your attitude is. And the other piece that's like really hard for me to explain is that that's different for each person, of how those images are trying to talk to us or how our body is trying to talk to us. Maybe my shoulders getting tight was like, put down that burden. You don't need more responsibility on your back, like me putting pressure on myself. So that's a way that we can start listening to it. And it's not necessarily linear. It's not necessarily based on thought. It's not necessarily logicking yourself out of it, because that doesn't relate to the emotional need and figuring out what the emotional need is. Jung called the way of interacting with archetypal patterns hermeneutic. So it's based on Hermes or hermetic thought. And the idea is that you are going down into the pattern and trying to look at that pattern and apply it to what's the emotional pattern here, and how do we apply it to a dream, to an art image, to what's going on in your life, and saying, what is this story telling us? So it's not necessarily about content or about like writing out a story or figuring something out. Sometimes it's about finding resonance, like an emotional and an intuitive resonance, which I think is, again, it's different than what a lot of the inner child work is being talked about right now. My way of meditating has to keep my hyperactive brain engaged somehow. I read a book in the early 2000s called Meditation Secrets for Women. And it was a very simple book, but its main premise was that for some people, doing something that involves the body is more meditative than sitting still and actively trying to clear your mind. Of like, that's where like labyrinth walking or just walking in general comes from. Or some people find washing dishes meditative, something that's repetitive, to be able to get your physicality going. Another way to do the exercise that we did to start would be to take your hand and do the same thing, but trace it out on your hand. This is grounding because like the sensation of your hand is there. Obviously, you don't need any art materials for this one. And I think it's kind of something that you could do in public and not look really bizarre. So that's a good one too. You could do the same thing and trace a circle on the top of your thigh as well. Anything that you do that stimulates your lower body like wiggling your feet, rubbing your feet on the floor, tracing a circle on the top of your leg, patting your legs. It's going to have some vagus nerve stimulation that'll be grounding. So anytime you feel too fast, like it's too busy, lower body stuff is going to help with that. Another way to be able to like add a layer to like this right here would be to stand up and see if you can like kind of like move your whole body with it so that you're allowing your weight to shift on your feet while you're breathing. The piece where your hands go back and forth over both sides of your body are like a piece of it that might help. So it's one of those things of like, if you don't feel totally like grounded, if you didn't get to that chill place, then the more you get your body involved, you might just need more time trying an exercise like that. And it's not doing faster or doing more. It's doing slower movements with more of your body involved for a longer period of time. Tai Chi and Qigong both have movements that are nervous system regulation movements. So it's those patterns of, they have that kind of a searching piece of it too, that's based on a physiological nervous system regulation. That reminded me of what an amazing tradition weaving has been all over the world, of whether it's spinning yarn or weaving or knitting, any of those things that are like, or even embroidery, of that small, like, you really have to focus on it, repetitive type work. And I think everybody needs more of that kind of stuff. When we didn't have screens to keep ourselves busy, that's what people did at night. They were whittling or weaving or knitting or sewing. They had handicrafts, like literally things with their hands that had repetitive movements. A lot of playing musical instruments are practicing the same movement over and over again. And we all need to get back to that. The basis of the word means a method or theory of interpretation. It's a way to look at Bible allegories or literary texts and say, what is the meaning underlying things? But it originally comes from the Greek hermeneutikos, and that root is Hermes. And he was the god of thought, communication, science, magic, learning systems, measurement, truth, as well as what goes on truth with is lying and dishonesty, commerce. And Hermes is considered a psychopomp, meaning Hermes could go to Mount Olympus as well as to Hades and anywhere in between. He had keys to all the places. His winged boots could carry him where he needed to go. And it's the idea that he is the messenger god between, that connects all the different things. So when we're looking at something hermeneutically, we're trying to find the connections. We're trying to look at the patterns. And some of that's intuitive. Like we do it a lot in dream analysis, where we say, what is the pattern here? And what does this situational pattern remind you of? What does it feel like? Where is there a similar energetic pattern going on? If you're dreaming about something that's like like an enclosure or a cabinet, like what's caged in your life. So, and then we're looking at like what the other pieces of are that are around that image to see what the situation in the dream setup is trying to tell you. So it doesn't necessarily mean you are caged, this is it. It may say there's something that needs containment now, that it's not ready to come out yet. So that's why we're looking at kind of like the whole situation to try to say, like, how do we interpret this pattern? Like, how does this pattern connect to everything else? What's the unconscious piece? What's the spiritual piece? What's the communication and relational piece between me and the world? And then what's the pattern inside of me? So it's really about reading patterns rather than being reductive and trying to boil something down to something that is generalizable for everybody and something that fits in a workbook. And I think this is a key piece where we can get a lot of meaning from it because it is so specific that if we were trying to come up with a meditation plan for one person, it might involve Tai Chi. And if we're coming up with another plan, it might involve like sorting through things or the dishes. And yet it's the same archetypal situation of saying, I need to find a place that calms my mind. We get into a lot of trouble with reductionism. That was one of the key differences between Freud and Jung is Freud only wanted to be reductionist. And the medical industry and academia have both glommed onto a lot of Freud's concepts and remained very rigid because of that. Because when it's reductionist and concrete and everything can be quantitative, it's like stick with the hard sciences, but you're not looking at something in a holistic way. And I'm hoping that we can have conversations that relate to things and can be amalgamations and synthesizing and more holistic, where we look at things on what is the broader pattern here and does this pattern relate to other things. I was really blown away by the book by Merlin Sheldrake called Entangled Life. He's a mycologist, and the book is interesting because he was studying mycology, but you can't study mycology by itself. You wind up studying biology, zoology, plant life, ecology, sociology, to a metaphor for neurology. And the book itself, the way it's layered, starts to give you a experience of how do we look at things all at once? How do we look at different disciplines, not in silos, but all together in an integral way? And Jung, in a lot of ways, was the beginning of integral thinking, of how do I look at this not just from a mythic, symbolic standpoint, but also the instinctual standpoint, and also a humanistic way, and also in a scientific way. And you just start building all these different layers to be able to look at it from different values, just like looking at something from what is my emotional value here? How do I pay homage and respect my emotional needs that are a different part of my brain and might as well be a different personality than the part of me that is sitting here talking right now? And how do I also relate to the archetypal forces that connect us all together? And that's a relationship to the big picture, to the cosmos. Or how do I relate this back to source, or whatever we consider spirituality? And I don't want to define that too much, because I want it to be open to what makes sense to you with those terms. But I think it's something that our society desperately needs right now. You could say, I'm having this dream because I ate this before I went to bed and I had indigestion. Or I was dreaming about the monarchy because I was watching The Crown before I went to bed. Or you dream about a snake, obviously that means a penis. This equals this. And anytime we have that level of assurity about anything, it's usually a defensive structure of the ego.
I get that, boy.
It's like me saying crayons are for kids I don't want to use them.
Right.
I'm an artist. Well,
Right.
then I
Right.
cut myself off to the benefits of what having a crayon-like material can give me. And maybe it's just fun and playful. And maybe that's useful too. Freud basically said symbols from dreams are related to neurotic symptoms, and that's it.
I didn't realize that's reductionist.
That's why him and Freud split ways, because Jung said there's more to what's going on here than the sexual theory, and I'm not going to reduce everything down to childhood sexual theory of the oral, anal, phallic stages. He's like, no, not everything's about that. There's other stuff going on. There's bigger things that we are connected to than that. And Freud did not want to look at the concept of the collective unconscious. But when you start looking at things like mycology, it's really hard not to. It's hard not to see those patterns when you start looking for them. Like there was this video called The Power of 10, and it's a really short video, but it starts giving you images from like a person walking down a road, like a street in a city, and it it pans out by 10%, and it does it over and over again until you have the whole universe. And then it goes back down and starts doing powers of 10 from like a microscopic level as well until you get down to like subatomic particles. And the images become the same thing. Like an image of the whole universe looks exactly like the image of an atom, and it starts to become a mirror of itself. And it's hard not to see that when you're looking at like the images of like what do trees look like and what does lightning look like in the clouds, and like what do our own vein systems look like, or mycelium hyphae. Like it all starts to look like the same stuff no matter what scale that we're on. The Greeks said that the image was the machinery of the universe. And that gets back to the concept of Hermes with systems of measurement and science, and they put magic and philosophy in with their science. The original term for metaphysics was just the book written after the book Physics. I think it was Aristotle. He wrote physics and then wrote metaphysics. It was just what is concrete and then what is beyond the concrete. It wasn't considered separate things. And I think that's what archetypal theory is trying to look at, is like, how do we look at the patterns that are not physically concrete? How do we look at psychology and sociology and ecology? And we see it through epigenetics. Like it repeats over and over again.